Coffee Sketch Podcast is our take on the intersection of old tech and new tech, the space between the traditional practice of the hand-drawn sketch that has been performed by architects and designers for centuries, and the modern-day use of the hashtag as a representation of a sentiment or a movement. Each week we plan to deliver a new pod about our ideas, sketches, and what's going on in our daily lives as we pursue our love of architecture, design, and sharing this knowledge with the next generation. I'm Kurt, and I'm in Flint.
And I'm Jamie, and I'm in Austin.
Hey, Jamie. How you doing today?
Good. How are you, Kurt?
Pretty all right. I was counting down with my fingers here because to start, and this one knuckle is not happy.
Is this like a podcast injury?
Yeah. Can I get insurance claim on that?
No.
What about your insurance?
No.
Workman's comp?
No.
Okay. Well, it's I guess it's a chalk it up to being old. So with a little bit of movie magic, how are you doing today? Are you drinking anything exciting?
I'm still having the groundwork coffee that I mentioned from California. Probably no affiliation with your USC Trojans, but I'm still having their blend, which I kind of like, the Venice blend. So what about you?
I'm going to assume that's a Venice, like Venice, California.
I would think so too.
Not Italy. Yeah.
I mean, the Venice, Italy was sort of where my brain went, but I think
both.
But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's more like Venice, California, which is, stories galore from Kurt, I'm sure. So.
Oh yeah, I like Venice. I just had a AIA meeting for the small firm exchange, and we were talking about conference sessions for 2022, and it got me thinking about the LA conference that got canceled, the COVID cancel and how much I was looking forward to going out with you to Conjunctive Points and some other Morphosis buildings and some Frank Gehry and some,
Yeah, that would have been that's still a trip that you and I need to plan, and we could see your brother.
Yeah. Speaking of Charlie, which I forgot to mention. So I'm near the bottom of the bag on my rootless coffee dark. So, maybe some groundwork. I should order some or something. Try something new.
Try something new.
Branch out. Anyway, my brother, give him a brief little shout out. Speaking of music, right? Our theme music, created by my brother. And he goes by the name Cold Fashioned in his music side hustle, his side gig, his
alias, his nom de plume. Yes.
So he had recently one of his other tracks in his electronic music get incorporated into a compilation. He was invited to this compilation record. And then I think the same producer of that asked him to work on a full release. So I don't know if it's a full EP or a full, LP, like the long play. So I don't know how many tracks in total, but he asked Charlie for a project of his own.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that. And we get definite shout out for that.
Yeah. We need to maybe bring him back soon. And he's like, oh, hey, he told me about it. And he's like, oh, hey, they invited me to do this thing. I was like, well, that's amazing. He's like, well, yeah, but now I got to make it. So, but there's no better pressure to have than
challenge accepted.
Yes, that's right. Challenge accepted. So cheers to my brother. And I knew he could do it the whole time. So, I'm not surprised. And I'm glad that we have his music as our theme song.
Absolutely. Well, and we all want to see, we all want to be challenged, in our work and our passion projects and whatnot. But I think seeing them realized and having those opportunities, I mean, that's what there's of course there's the nervousness and the sort of the the apprehension, but at the same time, the ego and excitement and challenge, sort of, getting your game on, that's pretty great. So awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Actually, as I'm known as the segue master, but using my brother's story I think this actually makes a really good segue, because you have a couple of sketches here that we're going to start with this one. That is an idea of your own creation that at the moment will remain an unbuilt. But then the
Correct.
next one is something that will be realized. So we have this. This is how a segue works, right?
This is I think that is, you look it up and there's a picture of Kurt sort of with this image and sort of pointing at it. Yes. Wow. Definition of segue. Not segue like the people like in downtown
or what
that are scootering on those things. I still don't understand how they work, but
magnets. I don't know.
Yeah. Fear of falling. So, but this is some work stuff that
file this into work stuff.
File this into the work stuff category, where you get sort of an open-ended problem and sort of a challenge, so to speak, as well, where one of our communities in North Texas, in McKinney, Texas, they have been a Main Street community for a number of years and have a very, very vibrant downtown, lots of businesses, lots of economic development, lots of investment in both the preservation of buildings, but also the rehabilitation of them. But as with any community, there are, kind of underutilized spaces. And there's kind of the question of, well, how do you address certain problems, and how do you activate certain areas of the city? How do you enliven some businesses? How do you create, more secure conditions for folks at kind of, in a 24-hour presence? And one of the things that our network does is we encourage our communities to have what they call imagine the possibilities. And typically those are more exclusive to businesses or buildings that are looking for a new tenant or looking for a new owner. And, part of our work entails kind of helping folks kind of envision what those possibilities might be from a conceptual design standpoint. I do pro bono design work, and then also educating them about the value of existing properties and historic preservation principles and good urban design ideas. So this one became sort of an interesting challenge because it's sort of on the periphery of architectural space. This is the space in between. These are, alley activations and in an existing urban environment. And part of the challenge is, one is sort of a really underutilized space, sort of the dead end alley in between buildings. That's the one on the right. And then the one on the left is sort of a through street, a definite active through alley between buildings mid-block, where trash is still being collected and stored during the week. And so there's also electrical and service utilities that are going through that space. So there's some parameters to any kind of project. One of the things that the our contacts in the community relay is that, they have tried to activate this space in the past and have kind of a mini con and, somebody, performing sort of not necessarily busking on the street, but having some little, kind of musical events in sort of these in-between spaces to activate them. But their challenge to me was, what other ideas? I mean, kind of open canvas. And what they were going to do was have an actual where they were doing an Imagine the Possibilities tour of a couple downtown properties. But one of the things that they were really wanting to highlight was these spaces in between. They felt like they were at a certain point and had some other events kind of going on in town. So they knew they were going to have good foot traffic and lots of people coming down. And some of these spaces weren't necessarily going to be activated, but they were going to station some renderings. So these renderings were stationed in and gave it as an opportunity to solicit some feedback from folks of, what do you think could be in these spaces? And so the images were intentionally kind of to provoke a response, and sort of be a little bit further out there, very vibrant colors, and sort of took some cues from our discussions about sort of that alley competition as sort of initial thought, and modified those to more sculptural forms that had some different functioning capacity. But it certainly was one where, and then translated it to two different spaces, so that and two spaces were, like I said, very distinct. One was sort of a linear space, and the other one was sort of this pocket, kind of almost a creepy alley in between buildings. And
right.
Had some dark alley, and had some photos of that dark alley, and it was like it had the fire escape, and and you couldn't see the end of it, and it was like, why would I ever want to go in that space?
Well, because Batman will come save
you.
Exactly,
we had Batman in our last episode.
Yeah, there's somebody out there,
right? But I think that I've always had an interest in art and installation and things of that sort, and so this is a great challenge for me because also it's recognizing that there is a budget for these types of projects, and even if it's not necessarily, this one's not necessarily going to get realized as it is drawn, it's intended to encourage somebody to think about the possibilities and do it in a way where the budget seems attainable and the concept seems attainable. So, and enticing for someone to think about other options. And so because they were trying to solicit some content, I mean, typically when you're doing a stakeholder meeting or something like that, and you're not, and in this case, not sure who's going to show up, there might be a reticence to showing any images of any concepts. It's sort of that voting with your feet. You don't necessarily want to tell them, well, this is what we've decided for your space.
Right.
But in this case, I think that the way it was programmed, it made sense to have something, because otherwise I think folks really wouldn't have had any compulsion to interact with the people who were trying to solicit content, because there were because they had some other events planned. So this was sort of an interesting tool, and having talked to them, the event has occurred. And so having talked to them afterwards, they said the response was fantastic. And it really got a lot of dialogue started about these spaces in their community. And so mission accomplished.
Yeah. I think one thing that's very interesting about what you mentioned is the intent is not necessarily to say this is the solution, but it's a proposal, a visual iteration that is a sort of snapshot in this time that's sort of out there to provoke a response. And it's not personal to you necessarily. This is not like your building,
right?
Or what eventually your design would be built, but something that is for the community. And so just presenting them something to look at gives them the opportunity to provide feedback on. And some may like it, some may not like it, but it might give them a chance to react and respond. And I was recently listening to another podcast of an architecture fan, or I'm a fan of this other art podcast, but that had the similar conversation around the presentation of design projects, right? And that they're not necessarily, it's not a personal, if you're in architecture school, it really shouldn't be, you shouldn't call it your building, right? Or my building, right? This is my building, which we hear all the time, right? But you should present it as, this is the proposal for the building that we have to design, because you try and take away some of the personal attack that could be had if there's a negative reaction to it. But it's really,
and the disappointment
to nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
And the disappointment that we're all human beings too. I mean, that's the whole thing you're putting yourself out there, with whatever creative work, especially as a creative. I mean, any creative work that you put out into the world, is that act alone should be celebrated to the degree that it needs to be. That's, it's not like a pat on the back, but it's like, I'm just saying it from the standpoint of, that's sharing some stuff, with the possibility of critique. And so what you're describing is absolutely, there for all of these things, especially as students. I think that kind of learning that kind of opportunity to have dialogue about your work, and be excited about the possibility of hearing somebody's point of view and reaction to the things that you do.
Right.
I mean, you might not necessarily agree with them either, and
right.
that's okay too. I mean, and that's not necessarily ego. That's just, sometimes you do have to defend your work and realize that, you are proud of it to the degree that you need to. But at the same time, what you described I think is ultimately makes any project or any proposal more rich. And I'm glad you're turning to this one too, because one of the things that, we do public art projects and public art proposals similar to the one we just were discussing. And sometimes they get folded in as a component of a design or a design request for our services. And there is a reluctance on our part to design something for somebody, for a community, not even just for an individual, but for a community, without having really kind of extensive knowledge of that community, living in that community, interacting with that community, because sometimes these projects are very, very quick and timing doesn't always allow for as much discussion as you would like. Now, you can't necessarily use that as a crutch either. And say, oh, well, I didn't know enough, so I just threw this out there as an idea. But I think that balance of understanding where you are coming in as an outsider and identifying yourself as one, to the degree that you need to, and then offering the opportunity for others to have that dialogue with you as well. In this particular case, unlike the other one, this one was designed on site initially, or at least the initial concepts were, with stakeholders, a variety of different folks. And it was a really raw space, not necessarily from the same security issues, but there was a clear identification of need and want and desire for the community to activate a space in between two different city blocks that were relatively open to both street faces. So it wasn't an alley space. It's sort of a kind of a leftover green space, not necessarily a parklet or a pocket park. And the buildings on either side were starting to get activated by two different business owners. And those business owners were part of the discussion as well. And then others in the community and the city were all kind of there that day. And the sketchbook images are the ones that sort of came out of that. And that was partially done on, and then sort of refined a little bit, and then provided as sort of almost visual notes of that discussion. And then taking it to an extra sketch of a more finalized kind of concept in color. In this case, these are all shown in black and white, but sort of elaborating on it, to, giving my own self some time to think and ask a few more questions and look at sort of other strategies for inspiration, as well as sort of digging down a little bit more on their budget and their capacity to execute it. But again, we're sort of showing two different sketches, in this case of actually the same space, but at sort of two different times. And what I've learned is that this one is actually, moving forward with additional input from the city and the community. And they've reached out to a local artist at my encouragement to help execute, using this kind of idea as a framework. And they're sort of taking it and riffing on it and taking it further, and sort of personalizing it for the community, which I love it. I can't wait to see it.
That's a great idea. And a nice example of a mindset that is thinking more of a place of abundance versus scarcity. And so that, your role in inspiring an idea and then it, taking root and being something that is being supported, financially and through the city and the constituents there. And then also then sharing that with someone a little more local like an artist, and that can build on top of the framework, as you said, and make it even better, right? And not to say that your design isn't perfect or amazing, but that more sometimes is more, and it can improve things, right, by having more of a interactivity with some local perspective, right? Someone else's local perspective. I do like the sketchbook sketches because as you were talking, I was kind of bouncing around between the plan diagram in the upper on the left sheet above. Well, there's the zoomed out plan on the very corner, and then a little closer in plan to the right of that, and then down to the three-dimensional sketch below that, which has a really nice dissection, or like you said, visual note taking, which is probably one of the best examples of how it doesn't have to be text-based note taking for the information to be communicated. And I think in this case, it's like one of those, a picture is worth 1,000 words, as you've diagrammed and sliced into this space. And then on the right hand side, is that like a more of a detail enlarged view of like a bench or something?
Yeah. And that was the thing, was it was ideas were coming fast and furious, as you're sort of standing there talking to folks and trying to get at least pieces of the puzzle down on the page, and creating at the same time. So you're sort of listening, dialoguing, asking questions, and then creating all kind of in the same. And frankly, there's not even time to take notes,
Right.
in sort of a written form, because I think at that point it's sort of cataloging things. Mm-hmm. And so in this particular case, it was opting for, to enliven the discussion and kind of play off that energy, like the abundance idea. I love that word. Is exactly what this sort of became. And what's interesting is if you don't show someone the diagram and only show someone the finished image, mm-hmm. there's a lack of the story that I think is really, really important. And mm-hmm. so even in talking to the community after the fact, was I encouraged them to use in any presentation or any discussion explaining the concept to someone who wasn't present, so that they themselves could fill in the blanks by pointing at things on both pages. Mm-hmm. And I think words in this case, would have really skewed, that conversation. And so in this particular case, I think the images help facilitate that conversation, or at least that's the intent. And from what I've heard, is it certainly has created that. And so there's sort of a committee of folk who are, a lot of our projects, end up, some of them are executed by professionals, and then some are executed by the community themselves, sort of in a DIY approach. Mm-hmm. Lots of volunteers, some professional leads, who are steering the process. But in this case, when you're trying to build capacity for a project and getting, lots of hands, it's okay to let them, change it and describe it the way they need to describe it, for it to make sense to a bigger, broader audience. Because at the end of the day, it really becomes theirs, and that's the hope and intent, for sure. And to hear, and then for me, there's a delight moment of being able to see it executed and mm-hmm. see what elements are like a through line completely, from the original concepts, and then what things get altered and changed. I think there's something sort of special about that as well. So, and I can learn, and I learn from it too. I mean, sure. At that point.
Sure. Because I think the perspective should be that it's all part of a continuum, and in the iteration, the process of, well, I guess an evolutionary process, right? So, it's not the end all be all solution, but it's a place in time that makes sense for now, and then sort of, I would imagine, inspires the growth into something else, entirely, once the town is ready, city or town or wherever somebody says, well, look at the foot traffic and look at this, So yeah, it's very cool. I appreciate it. That was great. Thanks for those 2 sketches. I mean, I always say thanks because it's just they're also good, but it's nice to catch up with you and then have the 2, they're from different days, and so we're able to kind of put them together into a little bit of a narrative, because it's been I don't know, it's just fun. Thanks. Those are great.
It's been an interesting month, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I hope it cools off a little bit down there, and I can send some of these northern clouds some shade down.
And I gotta send you some Texas coffee, so I'm gonna do that. Yeah, there you go, getting that in there.
All right, well, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.